we all accept the fact that we'll give our life in the service of others. Just don't do it needlessly, right? If you're risking your life to save an innocent, 100% okay with that. But if you're risking your life to enforce a statute, you might want to take a real hard, long thought about that and try to know where that line is, right? Because you can get them tomorrow.
Yeah.
You can charge the charge, and you can help them understand that it was worse for them because they didn't comply. If they would have complied, it might have been a ticket and they could have went on their way.
Yeah.
But now because of this, they all went to jail and they all have to post bond, right? That type of thing, making sure that they understand that if they just comply early on, it's a lot better. But don't ever put yourself in a situation where we have to explain to your widow that you died because you were trying to enforce a statute. That doesn't benefit anybody. We would rather have you alive.
Can you introduce yourself for me, please?
Yeah, so Sam Hulse. I'm the Bonneville County Sheriff.
Okay. And Sheriff, tell me where Bonneville County is located.
So we're in the southeastern corner of Idaho.
Okay.
And so we're right along the I-15 corridor, kind of centrally located in that corridor, halfway between Utah on the south and Montana on the north.
Okay. And how big is your department? How many people?
So we've got, 212 now? 212 total. That's everybody. That's all of our professional staff, as well as our jail personnel and our patrol.
Okay, so on patrol, how many patrol officers do you?
So the law enforcement side is 88.
88
as of October 1.
And give the audience an idea of how big Bonneville County is.
So 1,901 square miles. We have to add the and one in there, but yeah. So basically 1,900 square miles. We're kind of an interesting terrain. We have high desert on the western side of our county. As you move to the east, we border Wyoming on that eastern border, and it becomes more mountainous. It's beautiful. We have great terrain up there. We have everything you can imagine, all 4 seasons. So we get the heat in the summer, we get the snow in the winter. We have the Snake River that winds through our county. It's just beautiful, so it's kind of a recreation mecca for a lot of folks, and we've kind of been discovered from folks out of state. So everybody's moving here. So just so you know, the county's full. There's no vacancy. Yeah, it's a great place to live.
Do you border Yellowstone?
We don't border Yellowstone. We are the last large city before Yellowstone. We're 90 miles from West Yellowstone, Montana, or the western gate of Montana. And so we get a bunch of the tourists that come through here, traveling through to go to West Yellowstone. A lot of them, the last night that they stay in civilization is here before they go up to West Yellowstone, Montana. We've seen a lot of different trends with the amount of folks. That's become a very popular park, millions of visitors every year. We see a lot of folks from Asia now that are coming to visit West Yellowstone. So you see those tour buses coming through every summer, and you can't get a hotel room in this city. The city of Idaho Falls is our capital city. You can't get a hotel room in the summer months here because of that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. So you definitely see an influx of tourism through
Yeah,
here.
absolutely.
Okay, Sheriff, can you give me a little bit of idea of growing up? Where'd you grow up? What was your family life like? And was there anything growing up that led you to law enforcement?
Other than the fist fights as kids, probably. Just joking. I actually had a really good family. So I grew up here in Idaho Falls. I actually graduated from Bonneville High School in 1988. I met my wife actually after we graduated. I knew her sister before I graduated, but I didn't meet her until I had already graduated. She was a year behind me in school. And so we knew, we kind of had seen each other in school, but we didn't really get acquainted until after until she was in her senior year and I had graduated. My family, kind of going back to talk about that, I think one of the unique things about me is I'm the youngest of 7 kids. So my parents were older. They were in their 40s when they had me. And my father had actually served at the very close of World War II. He had served in the Navy. His father had signed for him to go into the Navy And he was actually 16 when he came out of boot camp. He was 17, and his dad had signed for him to go in, and so he had that experience of World War II, specifically Okinawa. He was in a CB unit on Okinawa while they were massing the troops to invade Japan. Of course, we know that they dropped nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and so that invasion didn't occur. But he was there getting ready for that invasion process. And he was there when the Marines were cleaning up the last of the Japanese soldiers that were on Okinawa. And for anybody who knows that history, that was notoriously a violent time. And those Marines had to go cave to cave to get rid of the soldiers. And he saw a lot of horrific things there that he didn't really talk about until he was much older. I got him to visit a little bit about it. But that I set that stage because I think I'm really almost a generation off as far as how I look at things. So I'm a Gen Xer, right between the Gen Xers and the baby boomers, right there, the early Gen Xers. But I think more like a boomer probably because of what my parents raised me to believe. And so with that, 7 kids, youngest of 7. My brothers and sisters would tell you that I'm the spoiled baby, right, coming up through, and there's probably some truth to that. But I had parents that taught me a very strong work ethic that I would argue is probably from a completely previous generation, or what we like to refer to as the greatest generation. But what I think was really unique about my dad was after he had been in World War II in the Navy, he left, came back to Idaho, was working on a cattle ranch in Montana with his brother. And he decided, I really need to get a trade. So he went back in and enlisted in the Army and was going to go to electrical engineer school. Well, that was in 1950. And for those that know history, everybody knows what happened in 1950, which was the Korean War. So instead of going to engineer school, my dad went to the Korean War for 2 years and experienced that. And so having the opportunity to have that person in my life that taught me about the history of our country, I'm forever grateful for that. And I think I look at situations, even some of the situations we're enduring right now as a nation, I think I look at those differently just because of that experience of growing up with a father who was a little older and had been put through the crucible of war and the way he saw the world after that. And I think it was very valuable. It wasn't easy. My dad, I think, they would call it post-traumatic stress disorder today, right? He had that, but we didn't understand what that was back then. And I think that directly affected his life. He overcame a lot of those challenges, but I think to say that didn't affect us as a family, yeah, it's not true, right? Mm-hmm. There were things that happened growing up and watching how hard that was for my dad to adjust back to life. But he came from a generation where you just were expected to stand up under the load, and that's what they did.
Yeah.
They made it work. And he was an electrician by trade after he got out of the military. And it was a lot of that knowledge that he gained as a engineer in the Army, running telegraph lines and doing those kind of things. And then he come back and got his journeyman license. So coming from a background of a family that was raised in Eastern Idaho. The other thing that I think is important to just mention there is I'm a 5th generation Idahoan. My ancestors came here in covered wagons, the majority of them being Mormon pioneers. So I have that history on both sides of my family. And so that tie to I think most of us in this plain, this valley, can point back to those ties. So that's why we're here. I wouldn't be in this valley if it wasn't for that pioneer heritage. And I think it's just one of those things that you have to realize is what brought a lot of us here. And a lot of the individuals that I know in this jurisdiction that have had family here for any period of time, we all tie back into that pioneer heritage. And it's kind of it's an interesting heritage to know about and know why you're here in this Eastern Idaho valley where you wouldn't otherwise be.
I'm curious, as the youngest of 7, your siblings would call you maybe the spoiled one, but as the 7th kid, do your parents at that point, they've like, hey, we've done 6. Do you have a lot of freedom as a
I
number
had
7?
probably had an unhealthy amount of freedom, right? I think they just didn't worry about, we've seen that before, that kid's going to be fine, right? So I think I probably did have an unhealthy amount of freedom, and I didn't always do the right thing with that. There was a certain amount of nonsense that I got mixed up in, that given a different day or a different time, might have gotten me into a lot of trouble with the juvenile authority. But I managed to get through that, and they
Mm-hmm.
were different times, different days. But yeah, we had quite a bit of freedom, and I remember, it used to be, parents didn't worry about you. The only rule was you had to be home at dark, right? And you were turned loose, and you went and did what you did. And some of that was good, some of it wasn't so good. But all the things and the being mischievous kids that you can get into, we certainly did all those. We had some bumps and bruises, and back in that day, I'm always interested to watch the kids these days because, um, a lot of our schools have a zero tolerance policy on fist fighting, etc. That was just extracurricular activity when I went to school, right? I mean, you learned to fist fight, and you learned to not run your mouth too much because you knew you might get socked in the mouth if you talk too much crap. And so that's the generation that we came from. And I don't know as it was quote unquote better, but it was definitely, you knew how to fight if you had to, and you also really thought about your words because you knew the other guy might choose to sock you in the mouth if you talk too much trash. So I think there was some innate value in that, I guess. So yeah, it was a good time.
What kind of student were you? Were
I
you
was an awful student.
awful student?
Yeah, I was an awful student. I was horrible. I don't think I even started to accept the fact that I needed to learn really anything until I was probably in about the 6th grade. And I was like, maybe I need to start maybe paying a little bit more attention. I wasn't a very good student. Um, I've always had kind of a gift for gab, the ability to talk, and they always said I used words that were way too big for my age. I don't know where that comes from. It's just an innate quality that I've had.
Do you think maybe that's being number 7? You have all
Maybe.
your
Yeah,
siblings talking to you?
all those kids talking, and yeah, maybe that's part of it, right? So I learned how to voice my opinion because otherwise you kind of get drowned out, I think, by the others. And so there's probably some truth to that, but it was just always something that, um, I noticed even from a very young age. People noticed that I could speak well, and I think that's just stuck with me all these years. It's not anything that I think I was really. If I learned it, I certainly learned it in the home.
Probably served you very well having those communication skills.
Yeah, yeah, I think absolutely. I think that's probably one of my stronger traits that I can express the ideas that I'm trying to lay out there. I drive my wife crazy with that because I'll speak off the cuff, and she's always like, "Don't you need a paper? Don't you need to write something down?" And even if when I do, I usually just do bullet points. There's certain things I want to cover. I almost feel like a speech constrains you and keeps you from being able to say what you need to say.
How about sports? Were you into sports at all?
So I did. I did when I was young. I did some little bit of baseball. I did some basketball. I wasn't very good at either one of those.
Okay.
So okay. I did some wrestling. I actually really enjoyed wrestling. I felt like the rules on the mat. It was a little bit better than the fist fights during recess. So those were the primary activities. Never. I did some track for a little bit of time, but I would say probably my favorite thing was the Greco-Roman wrestling. I did that for a few seasons. Enjoyed that, and I was also big when I turned 10. My dad bought me a horse. That horse nearly killed me later, but that's a whole nother story. But I did have that horse for a number of years, and I got heavily involved in showing horses in 4-H, and I did a lot with horses when I was a young man, right up until I got married. Then when you get married, uh, the responsibility of life takes over, and horses are expensive. And as we all know in law enforcement, you don't make a ton of money, so you have to make decisions pretty quick.
So let me ask you this: you're in this. You're in this. I don't want to say rural community, but rural community. You're dealing with horses. You're in 4-H. Are you working on the farm? Are you working with animals? Do you think that's kind of where some of the work ethic comes from?
So the horses were, for the most part, were really a hobby. I think the work ethic, I have to say, comes from my father and my mother. Watching them every day go to work. My mom, who raised 7 kids, plus as I got a little older, she started working outside the home. So not only has she done all that, and I watched all that, and this is back in the day when, she was making bread. My dad was growing a garden in the back that was a huge garden, and they just worked all the time. I remember being a little resentful because the other kids would be going to go to different amusement parks or whatever else. My parents just worked. They worked all the time. So Saturday, they wanted you out pulling weeds in the garden, and they were never forceful about it. They were just disappointed if you didn't help. So kind of coach you into it.
Yeah.
And again, I was probably the one with the most freedom. I think my brothers grew up under a lot more um, structured rules than I had. I think my parents had softened by the time I came along. So, but I always remember feeling there's tremendous sense of guilt if I didn't get out there and help a little, right? So I think that work ethic, as it often is when your parents have modeled that for you, I think that's where it comes from. Just recognizing that willingness to put in the time.
So getting back to your law enforcement career then, at what point is it when you're growing up, at what point do you decide,
Oh
hey,
man,
this is
I wanted to be a cop from I think probably the time I could walk.
really?
I just remember the sense of um, those authority figures that were in the community that I saw as truly helping the community. And I think early on it was that you're mesmerized with um, that that responsibility that they're taking upon themselves. And I don't even think you can even articulate it at that age, but it's just cool, right? It has a cool factor to it. I remember seeing law enforcement early on as something that was interesting to me. I didn't really begin to make that decision that I wanted to be that until um, I'd been involved in a program called the Sea Cadets, which at the time here in Eastern Idaho, we had the nuclear site. And so we had a bunch of Navy in town because they had those sub trainers out at the INL, where they would actually train them on how to handle the nuclear submarines and the drive systems and all of that. And so when I was 14, got involved with the Sea Cadets, and I spent a couple years involved with them and kind of that military structure, going to military like training. It's kind of like an explorer program for the Navy. And I had that attraction to the service because of my dad, right? At the time that he had served in the Navy and in the Army, and talking to him as a young man. So I honored that level of service. But then I realized, the Navy seems a whole lot like a job to me when you get talking to those guys. Like they got to paint the ship and they got to do all this stuff. Just like, I don't know if I really want to do that. And then I started thinking about law enforcement again. And at that point in time, you're starting to work jobs in high school. You're bussing tables, you're doing different stuff like that. And I remember looking in the mirror and saying, I don't want a job where it's the same thing every day. I don't want a job where I have to look in the mirror and convince myself that I want to go to work that day. I don't want that kind of job. And that's when law enforcement began to become very attractive to me because I felt like what we did mattered. And I felt like every day would be different. And man, I haven't been disappointed. Every day's different here. And you always got new stuff coming for you. And so it was the right career choice for me. And for those reasons, I had I actually, when I was coming to work down here, I'd gone through a psychological assessment, and I was sitting down with a psychologist after, and she said, "You know, based on your test scores, you could do whatever you want to do. Why do you want to be a cop?" She says, "It's so routinized. Why do you want to be a cop?" And I said, "If you think law enforcement is routinized, because I've been a cop for 5.5 years by now, right? As if you think law enforcement is routinized, you're wrong." I said, "Sure, we have forms we have to fill out a certain way. We have all that structure that's there, but it's not a routine job. It's different every day." And that's the way it is. And so that's the decision I made probably when I was, I want to say 16, 17 years old,
Okay.
is when I was like, yeah, I think I really want to pursue a career in law enforcement.
So how do you start? How do you end up? Your first job is with the Madison County Sheriff's Office. How do you end up there, and how old are you when you start?
Oh, so I was, to think about this for a minute. I was 21, and I was going to uh, Idaho State University law enforcement program, um, and that's a program that you can take. It's a technical certification. So by the time you're done with that, you can challenge the post peace officer standards and training entrance exam for the Idaho peace officer standards. And so I started into that. And before I had graduated, Noble Taylor, they called him Nobby Taylor. He's something of an icon himself. He's passed away now. He approaches me and said, "Hey, they need somebody to go into the high school in South Fremont High School because they got a drug problem up there. They need somebody who can go in undercover and try to buy drugs from these guys that are selling drugs up there." And I'm like, okay. And I was pretty clean cut, but I didn't have gray hair like I do now, and I definitely looked young enough to be in high school. And so that was my first job, and they sent me up there. I there was the superintendent and a couple teachers knew, and that was it. Everybody else thought I was a student. And so I had to reintegrate. And if anybody tells you they want to go back to high school, trust me, you don't want to go back to high school. So that was an interesting thing. I was going back to class. I was getting failing grades like you're supposed to if you're a troublemaker. And yeah, so I spent a few months towards the end of that school year working my way in with a group that was pushing some drugs around that school up there. I was never able to pin the guy down, but we were able to introduce another undercover on the outside that was able to get him. So it worked out. I was able to give him some intelligence information on it. And then they had me do some other undercover work where I bought some marijuana and stuff from some locals that were right there in St. Anthony. And that was the first time I got chewed out by a supervisor, which was a pretty good rear end chewing, which, you learn to take those things.
Why'd you get chewed out?
Well, so they wire you up, right? So
Yeah.
in the old school wires, that you had an antenna on one side and a mic on the other, and they're taping that thing to me. Well, I didn't know anything about them, but you push that in and then you turn it so it tightens, so it doesn't pop loose. Well, whether it was my fault or not, I mean, I'll take ownership for it because I was the guy wearing it, but I didn't know you had to twist that. Nobody twisted it. So we pushed that in. Well, when I'm moving around, that mic comes unplugged.
Mhm.
So they're not getting any audio. So they're freaking out. They're going to come rescue me, right? I mean, high school students, and for heck's sakes, I doubt they're going to kill me in the middle of South Fremont High School. But at any rate, I got chewed out because the mic wire dropped and I didn't know it. And I think the chief at the time, he was upset because he was worried about me. So you have to take it for what it's worth. So at the end of the day, I took my rear end chewing. But that's the first one in my career, and I remember that one. It was a pretty good one. But I checked the mic cable every time.
I bet you did. So at 21, you get thrown in to undercover. Is there any trepidation, or you're like, hey, this is great?
I was too young and stupid to have trepidation, right? I'm like, oh, what can possibly go wrong here? And they even put me into some situations I look back on now, and I'm like, ooh, that could have ended badly, right? And not so much in the high school, but I went and did some deals with some guys that, the informants introducing me were in that guy's house. I mean, it could have gone any number of different ways, but you're so eager to want to accomplish the job. And I don't think it was any dangerous than the other stupid stuff I did down here when I was a narc cop down here. But, at some point you're taking a level of risk there. And again, I probably wasn't smart enough to know how dangerous it could be. So you're just rolling with the punches,
Yeah. Okay, so from Madison County, you go to Clark County. Why the change?
So Madison County, they were running that with part of a federal grant that they were not going to re-up. So they were running out of money to continue that task force operation that they had. And basically they said to me, we don't have any openings. And back then, it was a different situation than we have what's going on right now. there were a lot of people who wanted law enforcement jobs, and they were few and far between. I remember the first test that I took while I was going to ISU to try to get on with an agency was for Pocatello Police, and there were over 200 of us that were testing for I think 3 positions, and it was an auditorium filled with people. We're not seeing that this day and age, but man, back then it was certainly that. And so they told me we don't have any openings in the sheriff's office. We'll keep you in mind if you want to test for us. And they told me, I know the sheriff over in Clark County just lost a deputy. I know he's looking for somebody. Why don't you go over and see him? Well, I'd already done all that stuff for Pocatello. So I just went to the sheriff in Clark County and I told him I was interested in a job. And he was able to just get all that information, my testing and background and everything they had done down there. And so he called me back the next day and says, you got a job if you want it. So
Wow. So that's nice.
that worked out good for me. And at the time, I had our firstborn son. He was, how old was he? He was about 6 months old. So it was a good feeling to, as a dad, to make sure I had a job, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that was a no-brainer for me. And so that's what took me to Clark County.
Okay, so you're in Clark County. You describe Clark County as where you really kind of learned how to be a police officer, a sheriff deputy.
Right.
Why is that?
Well, so you're a jack of all trades up there, and so everything comes at you pretty fast. And I remember thinking, it was just different days back then. So the sheriff says, "Hey, I'm going to ride around with you for a couple weeks probably, and make sure that you're comfortable with everything, and then I'll let you go out on your own." That lasted for 2 days. 2 days. Second day, he says, "Yeah, you're doing pretty good. You can read the maps. Everything's fine. Good luck."
So 2 days.
2 days.
Is
That
it
was
the
my
first
idea.
time you've ever done patrol?
Yeah.
Okay, so tell me, if you remember, what are you thinking as your first day on patrol after 2 days of basically an FDO program?
I'm thinking this is super cool.
Okay.
Like I've got a radar, I've got flashing lights, I've got a pistol, I've got a shotgun, I've got everything I need to do the job. And I've been through quite a bit of training down at ISU, and I've done some practicum with those. While you're going through ISU, I got to ride with the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, and I got to ride with the Pocatello Police. Those are the two agencies I did my practicum with. So I've been on some call outs. I've been to a couple of violent domestics. I've been to some things, just enough to know, and I have a pretty good understanding of the law, what I can and can't do. So it wasn't like I didn't have any experience,
Right.
but man, I'm pretty green. And back then you had a stick and you had a pistol. That was it. There was no pepper spray. There was, if you couldn't beat them down, you had to grapple and whatever else. And
Yeah.
so it was a different day, and you used your mouth a lot. You learned that really quickly. That look, most situations you can talk your way through, and don't turn to violence unless you absolutely have to, and it should be to defend yourself, right, or to defend someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And so having a good framework of that understanding. I really loved to write tickets back then. So that's what I spent a lot of time doing, running traffic, writing citations. And
Why'd you like that? Why'd you gravitate toward that?
well, I think the truth is probably because you're making a difference and it's tangible, it's right in front of you, and it's easy compared to some other types of investigation. So when you don't know all these other pieces, that enforcement piece from traffic, I think, feels like you're accomplishing some work. It's tangible. So I like being able to do that. Plus, we had some areas where in Clark County they felt like it was lawless and they could do what they want. So it was kind of nice to let them know there is enforcement here, and we will pull you over, and we will write you tickets,
Mhm.
regardless of who you're related to.
Yeah.
Making sure that they understood that. I'm not sure my sheriff always appreciated that finer part of being an elected official was lost on me at that point.
Yeah.
And the truth is, I see those things not a whole lot different today. I don't think any of us should expect favors, right? So the law's the law, and we should all be able to accept the fact if we've got a citation, we should pay it and move along. So from that standpoint, I enjoyed that type of work. But then also I began to realize how much the community really relies on the office of the sheriff for a lot of different things. And I guess I would say I started to mature into that understanding. To
We'll talk a little bit about what happened at Clark County, where you're, as you put it, you're a jack of all trades. I mean, some of the stuff that you're talking about that we discussed beforehand, I can't believe you're doing. But can you explain a little bit about the stuff you were doing?
Yeah, so again, there's just not many of you, and that community has all the same issues that happen in any community. And so with that, we ran a volunteer ambulance that was in that community, and all of the deputies served on that ambulance as well, just because the community really needed it. And so I took to that really rapidly. It was something I didn't even realize about myself, but I really enjoyed being a emergency medical technician and helping the people in the community. And so being able to help them when they were injured or having a serious medical event, I enjoyed that type of work. And I didn't see that it was even in conflict with enforcement. Sometimes it would create problems when we were out at an accident scene because patient care has to take the primary role. So we would need another deputy at the scene to help us manage that. Well, when I was working up there, it was for the first little while, it was just the sheriff and myself. And we had a local resident state trooper. So a lot of times he would get called out to the scene to deal with the traffic crash while we were helping with the patients. And so having that, and then of course we had a fish and game officer that was there as well. So we all learned to work closely together. And then of course we had, because it was so rural, we had fire turnouts and Scott packs, SCBAs for if we ever had to rescue somebody out of a burning house. Um, I only ever had to put that SCBA on once for an active fire, but I just thought it was great to have that training and knowledge. So I felt like Clark County had done everything it could to train us to a high standard so that we could be the best we could be for that community. And additionally, as you all know, with sheriff's offices, we're responsible for search and rescue as well. So that's a vast hunting area up there in Clark County. And we would get lost hunters every year. And so you end up on these searches out in the backcountry and snowmobiles, all those kind of things that you have to become proficient in. Luckily, we didn't have any large waterways, so we didn't have a marine program. But I think that's the case in the majority of rural sheriff's offices across Idaho. You have to be a jack of all trades.
Yeah, I mean, you're an EMT, you're a fireman, you're search and rescue, besides being on patrol. I mean, it's like you're learning through a fire hose at that point.
Right, and you're also turnkey for the jail. So we had an 8-bed jail, and our dispatch person was also our jailer, but she was not allowed to handle the inmates. Right, if you had to handle the inmates, we would have to come in to move them around or what have you. Otherwise, she wouldn't open the cells because obviously they could potentially escape. And so if there was any kind of a problem inside the jail, you had to come and deal with that. Or if the state police arrested somebody that needed booked in, or if you arrested somebody, you had to book your own prisoner. So you had to do the whole thing. It wasn't like you could just go drop them off at the jail. You had to process them into the jail. So if I made a DUI arrest, which was something I also enjoyed doing, I had to across the whole process of handling, getting the car towed, doing all that stuff, and then book them at the jail after you've completed your arrest paperwork.
Yes, can you talk about being in a small community and the need for cooperation between other agencies because you guys are so small? And if you talk about that, can you also talk about the riot that you had to take care of?
Yeah. So yeah, basically, um, it's like I mentioned. It doesn't matter what your badge, what shape your badge was, or what color your patch was. We were all law enforcement, and so whether it was fish and game or state police, whoever was there and available would help us. And we had a rodeo that would happen every year up there, where they would put a couple state police in town to help us. And it was always an eventful night. You know, we always ended up in some type of fight or, the street dance that they would have. Even Du Bois at that time was very small. I think it had 500 people in it. It had two bars. across the street from each other, kitty corner to each other. Well, those would spill out into a grand fight at the end of the street dance, and we would end up, in the middle of that. And some of the, first, what I would say are the first most violent interactions I had were at that type of a street dance or something like that, as a law enforcement officer. And so the riot in the jail. So how we kept peace in the jail was we were still one of the only smoking jails in Idaho. So we would allow them to smoke cigarettes. And man, you can gain a lot of peace if everybody could smoke, right? So people wanted to stay in our jail because they could smoke. And generally speaking, most of the inmates would lock down. They would do what you ask them to do as long as they had cigarettes. Well, we had one guy one night that wasn't going to lock down. And so we told him, well, you either lock up or we're going to come put you in your cell. Well, by the time we got everybody amassed to put him in his cell, he decided to walk in and close the door. So that's the quelling of the riot. But those types of things were pretty common. And then we had some serious stuff happen. I had a guy who tried to hang himself in the jail one night. Luckily, he slipped out of his own noose, or he probably would have accomplished it. But we got to him, got him help, and he didn't die. And that's a serious matter when you're responsible for the care and custody of those inmates. And it's difficult for a small rural jail, especially under the current standards, to be able to operate.
Yeah. Explain a little bit for the audience. In the state of Idaho, most sheriffs, well, I don't want to say most of them, but typically a sheriff has a jail. Do most sheriffs in the state of Idaho have a jail?
Most do. There are some jails, some sheriffs that have chosen to close the jail. And that's usually done in conjunction with their county commissioners. The county commissioners under the state code have an obligation to provide a jail. When you start talking about providing a jail, there are different ways to do that. It doesn't necessarily mean the jail has to be in your jurisdiction. And as complexity is added on to the challenges for sheriffs, some of the small jurisdictions have chosen to close their jails and place their inmates with a neighboring county. And that's not the norm, but it's certainly happening more often than even 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay, so when do you get to Bonneville? When do you start working for Bonneville County?
So I came to Bonneville County in 1999,
Okay.
January of 99.
And what brings you to Bonneville? Seems like you're doing some pretty good work in Clark County. You get to do everything. What makes you come to Bonneville?
Well, I think the biggest thing was recognizing that in Clark County, you were either going to be a deputy or you were going to be the sheriff. That was it.
Yeah.
And so when you start thinking about the ability to expand your career, the ability to, even though we'd had a lot of great opportunities, there were a lot of specialties and things that you couldn't do because you were just busy managing what was right in front of you. And this was home. Bonneville County was home to me. And so those factors of wanting to come back to a community that I was from originally and come back home and grow my career, those were the factors.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about Bonneville County Sheriff's Office in terms of specialty units. Do you have homicide? Do you have narcs? I mean, how many different units do you have under you?
So we have a general detectives group that includes people with the knowledge on hand how to handle homicide investigations. So it's a generalized detectives that right now we have 8 detectives in that unit. And they're going to do everything, but as they get more time under their belt, they'll certainly be the ones that are loaded the heaviest with like a homicide investigation. Luckily, knock on wood, we don't have too many homicides. But when we do, a homicide in Bonneville County is serious enough that we're going to throw everything we've got at it, right? So every investigator in that 8-person group is going to drop what they're doing and make sure that case is handled. We all know, especially if it's a whodunit, right? Mm-hmm. You've got 48 hours to start pinning down your leads on that. So we absolutely throw everything at an investigation like that. So inside that, they all have different specialties. And in a modern era with electronics, that's a whole nother vein that even as an investigator, when I was in there, the cell phones didn't have the importance that they do today. And so all of that knowledge and expertise as it relates to electronics and in investigations, it's just super critical now to a modern investigation. That coupled with all the social media and everything else that ties into a modern investigation. And I would put our investigative knowledge and our team up against anybody's as far as the ability to actually leverage those tools to understand what's important, how to seek the warrants, how to do all of that critical information for these investigations in this era. We have that knowledge in-house. And so those 8 personnel in that are dedicated to that. Then we have a special investigation unit that's tied with the city of Idaho Falls. We give 3 individuals to that. The city of Idaho Falls gives 3 individuals to that. And that special investigations unit is focused on narcotics, vice crimes, prostitution, those kinds of things, and any other special investigations that we may need handled as agencies. And so they're heavily involved in that, and they augment our other detectives groups in assisting with that. So undercover investigations, all of that comes under the special investigations unit.
How about your SWAT team? Is that kind of a conglomeration of everybody, or
So the SWAT unit is a collateral duty. So
Okay.
all of them are deputies that have other responsibilities, and then they serve on the SWAT unit as collateral duty. And so we have, I think we're at 22 members of that unit right now, and that includes all the important entry, breaching. We have explosive breaching, mechanical breaching, all built into the unit. We have an armored vehicle that we share with the city of Idaho Falls, so both teams. The city has their own SWAT unit, and we have ours, comparable in size, and we cross-train so that we can deploy on scenes together. And we've been, just in the last year, we've been to Custer County, we've been to Lemhi County to assist these smaller jurisdictions with, an armored vehicle response, both for armed barricaded subjects in those communities. And so we're not just a resource for Bonneville County, but we're really a regional resource when it comes to those 2 teams. And then probably the next largest after that is the STAR team, which is the South Idaho tactical response team, and the Pocatello Police. Those will be your largest SWAT units on the eastern side of the state. And we all kind of, work somewhat together, or we know each other's complements. We know where we can leverage one another. And if one of us gets called out into an area, we're always kind of waiting to see if they need additional resource. We'll provide that. So it's that much needed response. It's not needed every day, but when you need it, it's there. The other thing about having a collateral team is, as those operators are out working in the field, some of those are inside the patrol unit. A lot of times they're already forward deployed with knowledge and resources and equipment that a lot of times they can intervene in a situation early enough that it doesn't need to go to a SWAT call, because we had resource there early, whether that's with simunitions or what have you, to keep from having to stand that whole team up.
Yeah, so even though your department is, a fairly large department, can you talk a little bit about the collateral duties that you're still doing? I mean, you can't just do this, you got to do this plus this.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing is here in our main response area here, where the majority of our population is, that looks a whole lot, the guys that are working this area look a lot similar to what a traditional patrol cop would look like in a major city. They're responding to a lot of calls throughout the day, involving all types of different crime or concerns from the citizens. But most often those calls are handled within an hour or so. Then when you start to go to our eastern corridor, you're talking about more spread out area. You're talking about really involved rescues where you get people in the backcountry that they fall off mountains, or they get in the water, or they overturn a boat. Those types of rescues take a lot more resource and a lot more knowledge in the rescuers. And so we have our team to the east comprises deputies that are highly skilled and trained in operation of boats, operation of snowmobiles, and different types of equipment. Plus they have the backup of a 50-person search and rescue unit, which is a volunteer citizen unit that comes out and helps us on those searches. And so when we get somebody lost in the mountains, we're activating that search and rescue unit. And quite frankly, we wouldn't be able to provide that rescue service without the benefit of those volunteers. But that's a huge part of what we do as a sheriff's office, rescuing people from the backcountry, whether that's winter sports in the wintertime or the summer sports with boating and all of that stuff that we have. And again, because of our configuration and becoming kind of a mecca for that type of people that want to get out in the woods, having that interaction, that's a constant. It's a resource draw for us that we as a sheriff's office have to meet that.
Yeah.
And so that's just that extra duty. And I think, that harkens back to the responsibility of the sheriff that, as you know, came with us from England. So the Shire Reeve, who was responsible for 1,000 people in their shire, that becomes the sheriff here. And all those traditional responsibilities we still hold out here in the West. So that responsibility to respond to a call for need and help those individuals in that crisis, our responsibility as it relates to civil paper service and all of the things that come with that, and to take people's property in accordance with taxation, right? We still have those responsibilities. Didn't make the sheriff of Nottingham very popular, but we still have all those traditional responsibilities and goals that we have to meet as a sheriff.
Did you notice when you came over to Bonneville and you were starting on patrol, did you notice a difference in the types of crimes that you were responding to?
Oh yeah, I think the biggest thing that I noticed is, the people in Clark County were fairly self-sufficient. If they called us, they had a real problem.
Yeah.
In Bonneville County, the people call you there. It really is not a police problem, but they want you. They want you to come in and parent their kid, for example, right? You get those kind of calls. You didn't get many of those in Clark County. I saw a lot more of that. I'll be honest with you. When I first came to work for Bonneville County, what really struck me is how little equipment I had. But working in Clark County, the back of that Tahoe I was in, they're called, what are they called? Yeah, they're called Tahoes. Back then they were called Blazers. But that back of that patrol car when I came down here, first of all, I had a 2-wheel drive car. Up there, I had a 4-wheel drive. And I thought, why would you, as a county sheriff, want to run a 2-wheel drive car? We did that for a number of years, which never made any sense to me. I'm pretty proud to say that everybody's in a pickup or an SUV now, right? Because we are a sheriff's office. And it's critically important, especially in the wintertime, and being able to get out into the parts of the county that we need to be able to get out into. So it was just different times.
But I mean, in terms of the types of crime, were you dealing with more domestic violences once you got to this as opposed to Clark?
I don't know. There were some pretty violent calls up in Clark County. Mm-hmm. And it was right at that time where some of the domestic violence laws had changed. When I came in as a cop, we used to make the victim sign a citation. What's really interesting to me is I've watched that come full circle with the Clark decision here in Idaho. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's a recent decision from the Supreme Court here in Idaho, which has actually taken us back 20 years.
Can you explain a little bit about it?
Yeah.
I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, so basically what the law says is we were really treating domestic violence issues like they were felonies. So we had probable cause to believe we would arrest that violator. Well, under the interpretation of the Supreme Court, you have to have witnessed the crime, or you have to have someone sign the complaint that witnessed the crime. And you can't charge it the way you would a felony, which is probable cause, right? If you have probable cause to believe it occurred. So the Clark decision took us back to how it was back in the 1980s, about the victim has to sign the citation against the perpetrator, who is quite often the significant other of that person. And so they don't want to sign the citation, rightfully so. And we could step in. Now we have to have traumatic injury in order to be able to take it down the felony pathway. We have to have a traumatic injury.
Do you think that's better or worse?
It's much worse, in my opinion. Okay. Because before we could make a definitive stop and we could force this family into the court to talk to the court. Now it's not happening that way. And it really did take us back, 25 years
Mm.
in enforcement. It's just the terrain we're standing on, but what it's going to require is a constitutional amendment to take us back to how we were treating domestic violence, say, from 1990 forward until just recently. I think that Clark decision was 3 years ago. And so the deputies today are dealing with what it looked like prior to my career starting. But I remember those stories, and I remember having a pretty pointed discussion with my first sheriff about the fact that we could charge this guy based on the training I had received.
Yeah.
But it was kind of clawing out that, look, if you hit your significant other, we're going to take you to jail.
Right.
I mean, that was really the stance that we took, and it was about better enforcement of domestic violence. And so I saw pretty much the same type of violence calls in Clark County as I saw here in Bonneville. The difference was I usually had more deputies around me to help. Right.
Yeah.
So wherein I might not have been able to get that guy in cuffs right then, I might show up the next day in Clark County with a couple more cops.
And that's what I was going to ask you.
Yeah.
Were there situations where you showed up and you're like, I'm not dealing with this today. I'm going to come back and let it
Yeah,
go
sure.
down.
Or just get the person out of there that was the victim, right? And then leave it set. Yeah.
Mm.
You just had to be smart about how you enforce those things.
Mhm.
And there were a couple violent encounters where we had to fight people to the ground and that type of stuff. We did get pepper spray, which I love pepper spray. The bad thing about that is everybody gets it, right? Your little pepper spray, everybody
Yeah.
gets it. So you might as well just hose both of you down because you're all going to get it anyway. But there's no kidding. Pepper spray saved my life one night, and so I'm thankful for those tools that help us overcome that resistance. And it does really. They really are life-saving tools, whether that's a taser or pepper spray.
Can you talk about that story where you think the pepper spray saved?
Yeah, I'd made a DUI stop.
Mhm.
I'd pulled a car over, had 5 occupants in the car. I'm dealing with the driver. It's cold. It's like 8 degrees outside, super cold. And passenger gets out and begins to, he's displaying assaultive behavior, right? All the aggression clues, everything else. And it's 8 degrees. And he takes his jacket off, right? So that tells you things are fixing to start. So I'm telling him to get back in the car. The driver was fairly compliant. As that guy's coming backwards at me, I'm issuing him commands. As he gets within about a step and a half of me, he's just basically telling me, what are you going to do about it? And so I just come up with that canister of pepper spray and hit him right across the eyes with it. And so he couldn't see. And he charged right at me, kind of put his head down, come running at me. And I just stepped to the side and he ran right past me. And then all of them pile out of the car, right? And so I'm telling them to get back in the car. And they're not complying with me. So I just jumped back in my patrol vehicle, popped it in reverse, and backed up the road a little bit and waited for my backup unit to come, which was the state cop who was about 30 miles away, who's coming to back me up. And as I was sitting there, I'm telling him to get away from this guy, and he's gone down off the side of the road, and he's taking hands full of snow and rubbing his eyes with it, trying to get the pepper spray out of his eyes. It's 8 degrees outside. And I'm telling him, if you get away from him, I'll help him. I'll help him. They won't leave him. So by the time the state cop got there, this guy had frostbite on his hands, couldn't see. And but we had won the day, and so everybody in the car went to jail, and it was all good. And the driver got charged with DUI. But it's just one of those examples that without that tool, I don't know where that goes.
Yeah, I have seen those videos where it's one guy and there's 4 guys in the. I hate those videos.
Yeah. And sometimes your best option is to retreat.
Yeah.
At that point, if they're not going to comply. But luckily we were able to get them all together that night and get them all arrested. But yeah, there's just examples of that. Similar bar fights. I've been in bar fights. The only thing that stopped the bar fight was enough pepper spray applied in the correct directions, and it stops it.
Let me ask you something about what you just said. I think it's very interesting. I haven't got to ask this before. Having the ability to know when to retreat. I think a lot of a lot of cops have this built-in pride. I can take care of this issue. Where do you think that comes from? I mean, or how is that something that you can teach as opposed to being a prideful officer and thinking, hey, I can get this done, as opposed to going, wait a minute, this is beyond my control. I got to back up for a second.
Yeah, I think part of it you learn, and I do think that when you're a brand new cop, that what you don't realize is there are a lot of folks out there that don't respect your authority. They actually have contempt for it,
Yeah.
and they will kill you. Right? There are individuals out there that will kill you for what you represent to the society. So you have to remember that, and you have to remember that we shouldn't we shouldn't lose anyone lightly. The only exception to that, I think, where we should step into the fight is when there are innocent lives that hang in the balance, right? We all accept the fact that we'll give our life in the service of others. Just don't do it needlessly, right? If you're risking your life to save an innocent, 100% okay with that. But if you're risking your life to enforce a statute, you might want to take a real hard, long thought about that and try to know where that line is, right? Because you can get them tomorrow.
Yeah.
You can charge the charge, and you can help them understand that it was worse for them because they didn't comply. If they would have complied, it might have been a ticket and they could have went on their way.
Yeah.
But now because of this, they all went to jail and they all have to post bond, right? That type of thing. Making sure that they understand that if they just comply early on, it's a lot better. But don't ever put yourself in a situation where we have to explain to your widow that you died because you were trying to enforce a statute. That doesn't benefit anybody. We would rather have you alive.
Okay, so getting back to your career real briefly. So you go from patrol, but then you get into narcotics. Two things. So I'm assuming you asked to go to narcotics. Why? And then the other thing is one of your collateral duties is you're on the SWAT team and you become a sniper. Why do you want to become a sniper?
It's kind of these interesting things that happened in my life that weren't necessarily these things that I thought long and hard about. Oh, I want to do this. Narcotics was one of those things that I got a taste of that when I was in the high school, right? And that always interested me about what kind of work you could do there, and the fact that I felt like drugs were such a scourge on our society, and what could we do to begin to make a difference in that. And I felt like it was a good fight, right? We can overcome these things. Plus, now you're kind of directly involved in all those investigations. As a patrol cop, you get involved in them kind of on the ancillary duty side of that. Hey, sit here and watch this house. If anybody leaves, pull the cars over, right? That kind of stuff. And they don't answer our questions a lot. So I always kind of wanted to know, what was behind that curtain? What was the stuff that they were really doing? So I think it was that curiosity, and the fact that they got me in my first shooting when it was the narcotics guys. I was just helping as a patrol cop, and the guy left the house and took off running. He was armed with a handgun, and we ended up shooting him, me and a city officer. And luckily he survived, and everything went forward. But it was right after that had happened that I got selected to go into the narcotics group. That was an interesting time. I enjoyed the work, but it was probably the hardest on my family.
Just because of the hours?
Oh, the hours and the persona you adopt, right? So I think you have to be careful with narcotics work. I think we can lose ourselves in it. So, you grow the hair out, you got the earring, you're buying drugs from people, you're talking the talk. And if you're not careful, you start to believe that. You start to believe that that's you, and it isn't. One of the most telling things to me, on the same day, I was walking down the street, and I had long hair, big long ponytail, pretty good goatee going. And this older couple saw me, and they crossed to the other side of the street. And I thought, right? They obviously don't trust to walk down the same side. And then I walked into a gas station, and this girl who obviously had some drug involvement in her life was she was hitting on me. And I thought, man, this is an upside down world now, right? I'm getting the interaction from those that I traditionally haven't identified with, and the people that I've traditionally identified with see me as a threat. And I think that that was the first time in my life that I realized that I had adopted that persona enough that others saw it. And my wife had to put up with that. She had a long-haired hippie hanging out with her, and that's not really who she married. She was tolerant of it, but it was a real thing. And not to mention the hours, as far as the unpredictability of the hours, where I'm going to work today, but you may not see me for 2 days because something broke. We're following a car. Whatever's going on. We're 2 states away. Hey, I'm in Las Vegas. Those kinds of things, when those happened, I don't think anybody realizes that until you're doing it. And that was the difficulty on the family. Plus, we're raising kids at the time.
Okay, so let me ask you this, because I normally ask this at the end, but this is one of my questions. But since you've hit on it, I wanna hit on it while it's fresh here. So how long you been married?
33 years.
Okay, so you've been married a long time. When you got married, how long had you been dating your now wife?
Just over a year.
Okay, so she's been in it from the very beginning.
Yeah.
What do you think that you've done right to allow that marriage to survive as long as it has, given the long hours, given everything you've gone through?
Well, the first, I would put it on the tolerance of my wife,
Mm-hmm.
right? First and foremost, is I think that she believed in the career and she believed in what we were doing. And so she was tolerant of the things that I had to put up with because she believed in law enforcement and the importance of the job. So I think I would put that first and foremost as her tolerance. The next is that when I started to mess things up and she started to tell me that we were on the wrong path, I listened, right? I didn't keep just doubling down on that.
Right.
Right. And I also realized that I had made a decision then that if I didn't promote out, I was leaving one way or the other because I had given the time I could.
Okay.
Right. So I knew right then, hey, I'm going to try for sergeant. If I don't get sergeant, I'm leaving. I've got to go do something else.
Okay.
Because it was that time for me, for my family.
So before we get to you promoting, how did it affect you? So obviously your wife is tolerant. Did it affect your kids? Has the job affected your kids?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I think my youngest one's the worst one it affected because he didn't fully understand I was a cop. I think he thought I was a drug dealer. I don't know. I guess he didn't catch when I was putting a pistol in my hip, and I was dressed in some wild clothes and all that. But I actually think as he was 4 when I left, and I remember he told my wife, it was funny because I was putting on my uniform, my sergeant's uniform. I had cut all my hair off and I was dressing as a sergeant. And he stopped and he said, he said a helicopter. My dad's a helicopter. He was trying to say, my dad's a cop. He didn't understand that I was a cop. That's when that brought it home to him, that I was actually a law enforcement officer. And he didn't realize that before. I think he thought I was a drug dealer. I truly do. And I'm conceptualizing for a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
I don't think he understood what that meant.
Yeah.
But he understood his dad wore a gun, and he understood his dad had long hair. Went out and did these things, but I didn't think that he didn't conceptualize until I became a sergeant that I actually worked for law enforcement.
How about your older kids? Was any stress of the job on them?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing was they all understood and they were all told that if I pushed them one direction and I went another, that they were just supposed to follow mom. Right. And I think it created this certain amount of tension in the family that they understood that dad's job created risk. And I think that come across in different ways for him. And I didn't really realize it at the time, but I look back on it historically. I think it caused a certain amount of innate stress in those kids that they've paid for, right? Because they understood that the job was dangerous. And they understood that sometimes violence happened. And I think that we don't always give the kids credit enough to realize what they're discerning from that. Plus, my kids grew up when, 9/11 happened and all of that stuff. And so I think there was just a lot of stress from what we're bringing home every day, stress from the discussions about violence in the world, stress from the wars. I have friends that left law enforcement to go fight in Afghanistan, to train officers in Afghanistan. My wife and I had discussions about, do we stay in law enforcement? Do I go do something like that? Do I go be a contractor? We had all these discussions, and the kids are listening. So I think to a degree, good on you if you can keep your kids from being affected by it. But I think absolutely they're affected by it.
Okay. Okay. So, just real briefly, why did you want to be a sniper?
I think the attraction to sniping, I've always loved guns, and I've always loved precision shooting. From the time I was young, I've always been involved to one degree or another, even as a Sea Cadet, being involved in shooting weapons and involved in just the precision side of that, what comes with training with a weapon to a degree that you can hit a target at a great range consistently, has always interested me. And so that was the attraction to it, was building the skill with the weapon. Sometimes I'm a little simple, and it's only after that you start thinking about what a sniper might potentially actually have to do. And I remember the first time that I had a person in my crosshairs, and I'm wondering if we're going to have to shoot this person, because it was a female and she was armed with a weapon, and she had already shot at a neighbor. And I'm running through this in my head, and I'm like, man, I don't want to have to kill this lady, right? And you really start to think about that. We never get into the business or the profession thinking that it's going to be a female that we as males shoot, and that one bothered me a little bit. I was really thinking about that, and I had to sit there and think, because I know that if it was required to defend somebody else's life, I would do it. But man, that's not something you're going to walk away from very easy.
Yeah.
And I've always had a tremendous amount of respect for the snipers, because I was fortunate. I never had to shoot anybody with my sniper gun, but we've had snipers that have had to since. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for what they've gone through to do that. And I've also been there when it was our orders that directed them to go ahead and do that. So we own that in conjunction with them. But with that all being said, it's a tremendously important tool, and one of the tools that you can defend your team with.
Yeah.
And so I always felt proud of the level of skill it took, and I know others in the team that have been snipers, and I'm proud of that group and the work that we've done.
Okay, so let's shift gears here. At some point, you decide, I want to promote. Okay, so the first question is why?
I really felt like I had been given a great degree of opportunity, and I felt like I had something to give back to the agency as far as my upbringing, the way I looked at the world, and what I could bring as a supervisor, just to help everybody in the team do the best job they could. I really believed that, based on my training and experience and knowledge and being in other counties, that I could bring that knowledge to bear, and hopefully work with that patrol team to be the best patrol team that they could be, whichever team I was given. So I believed in my own abilities to make a difference. That's probably what drove me to compete.
Once you started down that road, once you decided that you wanted to go to leadership or the management route, was the goal always to become the sheriff?
No, I stopped short of sheriff. I felt like somebody asked me, "Do you want to be the sheriff?" And I always said, I think that's kind of a cheap word, want. There's more to the job than that. I had somebody tell me a long time ago, if you possess the innate qualities to do a thing, you have the responsibility to at least entertain the idea. And you should be willing to put yourself out there to serve. And so it was those two factors in my mind that I knew I could do it. There were a lot of things that had to come into place to be able to do it. And it wasn't easy, the decision to become sheriff. And it isn't easy every day that you carry the title. There's a lot that comes with it. And I firmly feel like all I'm doing is holding this for a while. It actually belongs to the people, right? So I'm hanging on to this hot potato, if you will, and it scorches you a little. But at some point, you're going to pass that off to someone else. And hopefully you pass it off better than it was handed to you, that you pass that public trust off better than it came to you, and hopefully they can carry it to that next level. And that's really how I feel about it. I don't own it. It's just something that's entrusted to me for now. And I have the responsibility to carry it well for the entire team.
So it's chief deputy right underneath sheriff, right?
Right.
So you kind of thought, okay, this is a good position. This is where I'm going to be. What pushes you to become the sheriff?
I looked around me and said, if I don't do it, who's going to do it?
Okay.
If I don't take it, who's most likely going to be the next sheriff of this county? That's what pushed me.
Okay. Explain to the people, because I don't think really people understand this. What is the difference between a sheriff and a chief of police?
So the sheriff is a constitutional office. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that you are elected by the people. And so the people of your county elect you as the primary law enforcement official for the county. So you have that responsibility for the oversight and protection of the county. You have a lot of partners in that process, and there's a lot of checks and balances in place. But that rests with you as the sheriff. And you answer directly to the people. So if the people don't like the job you're doing, they can replace you with the next person who's willing to take a run at it. That's the difference. And it is the only law enforcement official in the country that answers directly to the people.
It just seems like you're answering directly to the people, whereas a chief of police, man, they're at the whim of the mayor or the city council, and they could go in a minute. I just see that sheriff as a very integral part of the country, of law enforcement.
It certainly is a part of that that Western culture that came with us from England, but it's even expanded. Some areas have allowed the office of the sheriff to be eroded a little bit, but here in the West, especially, and not just in the West, you have other parts back east that a lot of the sheriffs still retain their traditional authority. Even upstate New York, they still have a lot of their traditional authority outside those cities. So the office of the sheriff is an important office for the people, because it does give that direct input. So if somebody wants to talk to me, that's what I tell my staff all the time. Somebody wants to talk to me, they can come talk to me. We'll make an appointment. I may not agree with everything they're saying to me, but I'll certainly meet with them.
Yeah.
Because as the sheriff, any citizen of Bonneville County, I owe that meeting to. And I'm happy to sit and listen to them, see if we can make it better. We're not going to make everybody happy. And we do have the law we have to follow. And that's the other thing I like to remind people of, right? We have the books here. We have the rules. People will tell me, well, you're a constitutional sheriff. Well, yeah, if we're constitutional sheriffs, we honor the three branches of government, right? So that means I have to listen to the judicial branch. I have to listen to the legislative branch. But at the end of the day, we follow the law.
Tell me a little bit about your leadership style. If I was going to talk to some of the people that work under you, how would they describe your leadership style, and where did it come from?
Well, I think they might describe it differently than I would. I mean, we all have the idea of who we're trying to be. I would hope that they would describe my style as allowing input. I firmly believe it's a team, and I think I'm the farthest thing from a dictator that you're going to get. Right? I try to draw a consensus. At the end of the day, the final decision rests with me. If something goes wrong, it's my fault. If something goes right, the team did it. And I think that's the most important thing. Mm-hmm. You have to give credit to the team, because it is the team that carries you. And if something has gone wrong, then it's my responsibility to take that on my shoulders so that the team can enjoy that protection. Uh, that's the job of being the figurehead in my mind. We get it right more than we get it wrong. But if we get it wrong, we have to say, yeah, we messed that up.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the job of the sheriff to stand up there and say, yeah, that one's on us. It's on me in particular, because it's my job to make sure that this organization is capable and competent of doing its job. I'm proud of this team, but I would define my style as being inclusive and trying to draw everybody's ideas into that final decision. Because I have a lot of people here that are smarter than me, so I need to lean on them to help me make the right decision. But at the end of the day, I'll make the decision, and then we'll live. If that's the wrong choice, that's my fault. So
Now, you started working on stuff when you were a lieutenant, and you're still working on certain things to this day. Can you talk about some of the successes you've had with the sheriff's office, and maybe there's some long-term goals you'd like to have done before you?
yeah. So one of the big things was Sheriff Wild, who was the sheriff before me. He let me serve on what at the time was called the Mental Health Board, which was a board of advocates that met to talk about the issues tied to mental illness in the community. And that evolved into organizations that are called the regional behavioral health boards, which includes both mental illness and substance use and how those two things relate together. And what I realized as I got in those meetings was, first of all, law enforcement had not been consistent at the table. It had been so important for us to be involved in those meetings, but yet we weren't paying attention as law enforcement. So I've tried on this side to make sure that we have law enforcement involved in those discussions so that the advocates see us differently and realize that we're about overall good outcomes for the community. And the fact that as a sheriff, you understand how many of the folks in your jail are truly just suffering with substance use and or mental illness, or both, right? Yeah, the way that comes together. And so when we can do a better job providing services to folks that can stay stable, that's better for the community across the board. And if we can divert these people away from the justice system entirely and back to systems of care, how valuable that is to law enforcement in general. Because a lot of times we get mixed up in situations where somebody ends up injured or killed, that if we would have been on the front end of that, dealing with that differently and getting this person directed towards services, maybe that never happens. So all of those broader discussions are important for law enforcement to be involved in. And you're seeing that outcrop in a lot of different ways. But I had the opportunity to participate in that. I had the opportunity to chair the Region 7 Behavioral Health Board. I just dropped that chairmanship in July after I think I was the chairman for 6 years. But it was time to move on to some other things. And what that's kind of changed into is I got involved with the National Sheriff's Association as a sheriff, and I watched another sheriff present on a program called Ignite, which is inmate growth naturally and intentionally through education. And when I saw that program, I said, we need that in our jail. And I was able to bring it back and let our team look at it here. And we were the 9th county in the nation to launch that. And I'm so proud of our team because they just graduated their 18th, or is it 19th? 18th GED student this year out of our jail. So we're handing out GEDs like they're candy over there. But I want to tell you, the hope of those inmates, when you come in and sit down and visit with them, they're thankful that they've been given an opportunity. Some inmates are not going to take to that. And we all recognize the recidivist criminals that we're going to have in the organization. That's not who we're talking about here. We're talking about individuals that, given the opportunity to change, want to try. And we should let them. And the Ignite program has helped us bring that in to our jail in a big way in conjunction with the National Sheriff's Association. So thankful for that program. And if there is a solution to what ails the United States of America, it's going to be programs like that draw us closer together, that help us stop this us and them kind of thought process that we've got going right now.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I'd ask people to remember is 90% of the people incarcerated in our jail today are going to be back in the community in 90 days. So they're your neighbors, they're your friends, they're your family. What can we do to set them on a better pathway and have them become responsible and productive citizens rather than just recycle them back through the justice system again? We're not going to save them all, but if we could even save 2%, 3%, what value is that long term? I think it's huge.
Yeah.
So,
okay, last couple questions for you. If somebody wanted to work for you, they want to come to work for Bonneville, what kind of people are you looking for?
hey, I'm looking for people that want a challenge, that really want to step in to what is a challenging environment, which means you're not afraid to work, you're not afraid of call volume, because that we've got that here for you. Our deputies are probably some of the hardest work deputies in the state. But what you're going to get with that is you're going to get a team that backs you. You're going to get a sheriff that backs your decisions. As long as you're doing it lawfully, we're going to back you 100%. I can't promise you an easy time. I can promise you a fulfilling time. And if you want your job to matter, if you want your life to matter, then being involved in law enforcement, being involved in the Bonneville County Sheriff's Office, I think you're going to feel that. You're going to see that what you're doing is making a difference for the community, making a difference for the state of Idaho, and making a difference for the United States as a whole. That's what we're looking for, is people that are dedicated to the service of their fellow man and that are dedicated to making the world a better place to live in. Those are the type of people that I need. So if you don't think you want to work hard, you probably don't want to work here. It's a tough job, but it's a good job, and we'll pay you a decent wage. You can make more money doing something else. There's no lie about that, but you'll make enough money to pay your bills, and you'll have a nice retirement, and you'll look back on the career and realize what you did mattered, truly mattered, and you'll have the experience that you can say, I made a difference. And that's who we're looking for, people that want to make a difference.
How are you doing with the quality of recruits for these days? I'm sure the numbers are down, but how are you doing with quality?
So we do not adjust our we have a minimum standards bar, right? You got to get over that bar or you can't come to work for us. And we have to maintain that standard. What has happened though is the numbers are not there. So we have to comb really hard now for the people. So we used to get 100 applicants. Now we'll get 10. And so we just don't get the numbers we used to get. And we look really hard at people, right? It used to be if your application came across our desk and it had a spelling mistake on it, that one's out. Well, now we're like, maybe we can teach this one to spell, right? We'll give that a try. So if they're otherwise not compromised, we'll certainly look at them. But things that would just get thrown out before at least get looked at today. And then we ask ourselves, can they be taught? If there's a fundamental flaw, something that we can't let you in, we're not going to let that person in. So our standard isn't adjusted. The bar is still the bar, but we'll certainly look at any and all comers because we just have the ability to. You know, when you had 100 applicants, you were looking for excuses to throw them out.
Yeah.
And now we look at everyone very closely.
Okay. All right, last question for you, Sheriff. Can you look back on when you started in 1991 with Madison County until now? Has your attitude toward people and society changed?
100%.
Okay, how so?
I think when I first came in, I saw the world really black and white. I looked at things like, this black and white. This is the way, this way or that way. I see it much more on a gradient now. In that, look, we all make mistakes. We're all on a pathway in life, and we're all trying to do the best we can with what we've been given. And some of us have started in a place or in a position that meant the climb was harder, right? I really now try to see the person in front of me and not make too quick of a judgment on anyone. What I might see as disparaging of another individual, I really have to think about now. And I've had the opportunity to get to know people that are not involved in law enforcement. And I recommend that for all cops. Have some friends that aren't cops So important. Because not everybody sees the world through cop eyes. And you just have to accept that fact. And you have to accept the fact that things aren't always the way they appear initially. And you have to think your way through it. And where you can offer grace to someone, do so. And we have to enforce the law, but that can mean a lot of things. And how we choose to do that matters. And if we can give somebody an opportunity to make a decision to turn their life for good, we want to do that. So don't try to hold people accountable for something that they did 20 years ago. Try to let them back into the fold. I think we could be better at that as a society. And so I see people as innately valuable, and if you'll give them the chance, they'll surprise you. And I've had that opportunity by working in the different groups and listening to people that come from different backgrounds, and realizing that people change every day. And if you'll give them the chance, a lot of people, they just need you to believe in them, and they need a pathway to improvement. And if we can provide those things for them, they will change. Doesn't mean we're not going to be disappointed. Doesn't mean that sometimes that guy that you thought was going to make it, there he is back in your jail, right? And it's not saying that we don't have to enforce. We do. But I've come to believe in the human spirit to a great deal more than I did when I was a young man. And I do think how we treat one another really matters, and our teams matter. And law enforcement has to understand that there's great honor in our profession if we do it right. And we've taken some black eyes as an organization, as a profession. You don't have to own that. You don't have to walk around with your head down. Realize if you're serving your community, you're taking care of the public in your community. Be proud of your job. Be proud of what you have, and be proud that you serve your community. And make sure that you do your job to keep that badge shiny. That's important. And don't shut your neighbors out.
Thanks, Sheriff. Appreciate it.
You bet.